Chapter 55, The Watchers. The Watchers. Frithia shifted in her seat, a shaft of sunlight from the window next to her warming a bright pane across her knees and bringing to life the vivid frescoes that covered the other three walls about her. From the wood-paneled lower half of the room to the ceiling, gruesome demons danced and twisted, locked in mortal battle with knights and priests of every creed, limbs sundered and stylized red blood dogged across all with wanton enthusiasm. Frithia wondered what kind of frame of mind being forced to look at such everyday left you with. But perhaps this sort of decor was usual in the church, and no man seemed not to have noticed, and neither had the room's other occupant. They had been seated before Audrun's desk just moments ago, but the older man had not spoken yet, being busy tidying away the last of his papers. He was in his late 50s by his look, his grey hair thinning on his crown, while his tanned face was lined and dominated by darting, close-set eyes that did not seem to linger anywhere overlong. His robes were the same as those worn through the keep, save for the single strip of pale gold that ran from each broad shoulder and down the sleeve to cuff. He had been a well-built man once, strong and commanding, and it still showed in his manner as he, at last, straightened and leaned back in his chair to greet them.
Well met. I am Father Audrun, the head priest of the Knights of the Vigil. I understand you both arrived yesterday, a brother worth of our temple in Ithkatla and his friend, Malal. It is so, Father,
offered a no-man politely,
and you have our thanks for taking the time to meet with us. I am told it is in great demand at the moment.
Audrun sighed, grey hair falling across his lined brow as he shook his head, his gaze dropping to his very tidy desk.
Yes, I am sorry to say it is. I have been told you seek information on the Ballspawn and their prophecies, the same information sought by a mage who visited here some months back, but I fear, I cannot help you. The library has been sealed and cannot be entered. We heard about your call for mercenaries back down in the plains,
said Frithia.
What has happened here?
Audrun sighed again and rose, moving from his desk to pace slowly along the wall beside them.
Long ago, Helm gave us a mission here. This holy order formed to keep watch on a seal holding a demon prince captive far below us, deep within the mountain. We were to watch for any weakness and strengthen the seals when time came. However, we were tricked. We monitored the seals, but all seemed well, the demon within feigning sleep, when in fact it was awake and plotting.
Audrun paused to contemplate the spiny devil that was devouring a pious-looking knight, armor and all, upon the wall next to him.
A month back now, the creature tore the veil between the planes, and lesser creatures of its infernal kin poured into the library. The secondary wards triggered and everything below the ground floor was sealed. We are not a martial order, and our few attempts to retake the lower levels ended in slaughter.
So,
you put the call out for mercenaries,
concluded a no-man.
Would not members of our own church heed your requests for aid? I fear they could not spare the men,
Audrun answered as he continued his circuit of the room.
Their arms are needed to protect the citizens they serve in these troublous times. The mercenaries began to arrive soon after the call went out, but I fear none have yet been successful. When many hear what they are to face, they wisely leave once more. We have allowed a few of the more confident groups to enter. None here would ever knowingly allow entrance to someone who had no hope of success, but some speak so haughtily of their abilities, it is hard to sift the braggarts from the true heroes.
Audrun stopped again, this time at the window, the man's words misting the glass as he addressed the soaring peaks below.
I know why you have come here, following in the passage of the mage, Melissan. I will gladly arrange for you to have access to all she sought here, but I cannot open the library until the wards have been resealed. We have a group of men, arrived last night and strong enough that they wish to stay and face this peril.
He turned, looking directly at Frithia for the first time since they had entered the room.
I would like for you to lead them. Me.
Audrun's gaze was back on the window.
Yes. I note the mark of Baal upon you and sense the power you hold. I believe of any, you will succeed here.
Fritha glanced to Anomen and offered him a shrug. It did not seem like they had much choice, and Anomen agreed.
Certainly, father, we will. Ah, not so hasty, my brother,
the priest cut in, the man on the move again and heading for his desk.
I was hoping you would remain here. The wards in the upper library are weakening, and we may need a man of your faith to help strengthen them.
Anomen did not even glance to her for an input that time.
I am sorry, father, my place is with Malal. Besides, once we seal the demon, the upper wards can be dropped anyway.
Yes, Audran sighed, finally settling back into his seat, though the window held his gaze still.
I suppose that is so.
They made their preparations in Fritha's room, buckling on armor and packing the few supplies they might need into Fritha's small knapsack. The help of an acolyte had been offered, but at a shared glance, both had shaken their heads and there was a steady silence between them now, broken only by the occasional request. Fritha was shrugging on a borrowed chain shirt, the clinging weight about her body feeling strange after so long. She had just finished negotiating the neck hole over her wooden hairpins, the girl rolling her shoulders a few times to settle the padded lining in place.
Fritha, could you?
Behind, Anomen looked imposing in his full cuirass, the skirted chain undershirt rasping against his greaves, his last vambrace causing him trouble as he fought to buckle it closed.
Here,
she smiled, tightening it for him. He nodded his thanks, turning to take up his shield while she buckled on her sword.
Do you want to visit the chapel before we go down? No, it will be fine.
Anomen belted on his mace, Fritha closing her pack to throw the strap across her body, and they were done, the pair looking up at the same instant to find themselves reflected side by side in the room's long-looking glass. Gone were the hats and light linen tunics they had traveled in, Fritha's sandals swapped for her long leather boots, the dull shimmer to her chain a match to the shine of Anomen's breastplate. Had they once traveled the whole of dressed so? Who was she fooling? If their disguise had not made it necessary, they would have arrived at the keep looking just the same. How quickly she had become accustomed to looking like everyone else, and how much she already missed it.
I hardly recognize us.
Anomen tried a laugh. He seemed nervous and was trying to hide it, a hand landing heavy on her shoulder.
You have the wardstone Audran enchanted to allow us through the seals.
Yes, she answered, making to hand it to him, but he forestalled her with a smile.
No, you keep hold of it. I would feel better knowing our company's priority is to keep you alive.
She could not return a smile that rested so ill at ease with the worry within his eyes.
You're frightened, aren't you? No,
he refuted, taking up his mace.
Not in any way I can describe, but there is a repulsion in me. There is something corrupt here. I have felt it since last night, even in the chapel. My soul recoils from it. You could stay up here, help with the wards.
She offered without any real hope. Anomen shook his head.
No, I could not. That I recoil from this means I must act. Come, we complete this task and we can find what we came here for.
A robed acolyte met them in the hall to lead them through the keep, down coiled staircases and past locked doors, Fritha feeling the wards prickle as they finally passed through into a small antechamber. They were underground now, she could feel it, the lamps making patterns of gold and black on the stone walls. A single large door was opposite, heavy wood bound with iron, the small room before it packed with priests, the dust tracks on the stone tiles indicating that whatever furniture the room had once held had probably been moved out to accommodate them all. Father Audran turned to greet them with a grave smile.
Ah, and the last of us. Friends, I would have you meet Warwick, Rook, Param and Fane.
They were the only 4 men there not wearing robes. Warwick looked to be the oldest at 40 or so winters and likely their leader, his face scarred and grim under a mop of curly brown hair. Rook was closer to their age, and likely from cooler climes by his pale skin, his black hair worn long, and the man brushed it as he nodded to them at his name. The man next to him was a Kalimshite, bearded and unsmiling, who Frithha assumed was Param, making the tanned, blonde half-elf carrying the bow, Fane. They looked proficient, well used to that life, and very aware of their own skills as they cast a critical eye over the 2 newcomers. Frithha straightened to the inquiring looks.
Well met. Sirs, this is Sir Iorwerth, a brother of our faith, and Lady Malal, his companion,
continued the priest with a glance to her.
You have the ward stone, my lady? Pray guard it with your lives, for once the wards are back in place, only possession of that will get you out of the main chamber. Here.
He handed her a box-like leather bag of a similar size to her knapsack.
Within is all you will need to replenish the seals. Be warned, it takes much power to breach the wards here, and each time we do we endanger this entire keep. Once you are inside, we will not be able to raise the upper wards again. They will only drop once the seals are re-strengthened.
Audryn's throat seemed to close over the words in his emotion, those priests about him slowly lowering themselves to their knees to chant, and Frithha felt the wards about them fizzle back with his hoarse blessing.
Helm be with you.
2 priests moved forward, the enchantments and protections upon them so thick as to leave a blue glow to their skin. As though in a trance, they slowly opened the door upon the blackness beyond, and, one by one, those to enter drew their weapons and stepped into the darkness. Frithha just suppressed a flinch as the door boomed shut behind them, the rush of cool air bristling the back of her neck. A moment for her eyes to adjust to the darkness, and she found herself in a cramped corridor, the bookcases either side making a narrow passage that ran as far as she could see in a curve along the perimeter of that circular chamber. Here and there runes inscribed for protection glowed in yellow upon the shelves, fallen books, charred and trampled, their pages scattered across the stone tiles, visible in the weak pools of light.
Who has the lamp?
Muttered Warwick beside her. Frithha saved whoever did the trouble, their group suddenly bathed in the pale blue of her wear light.
You a mage, then?
Concluded Rook. She shrugged.
After a fashion.
A distant clatter cut off further comment, all heads whipping to the sound.
What was that?
Hissed Param. No one answered him, all trying to catch the faint chittering that hung just on the edge of their hearing, and Frithha could have sworn she heard a shrill ripple of laughter.
The priests said the main chamber is 4 floors down,
continued Warwick, his stern voice cutting through the escalating air of unease.
You got the map, Fane.
The half-elf tapped the side of his head with a cocky grin.
Yep, and it's this way. You're with me, mage, I work best in the light, don't fret, gallant.
He added at a no-man's frown,
I'll keep an eye on her.
It was cold down there, Frithha could feel it creeping into her bones, the gagging scent of burnt flesh and sulfur stinging her nostrils. Fane was prowling just ahead of her, his bow exchanged for his sword in those close quarters, a no-man just behind with Warwick, while Rook and Param kept a watch at their rear.
There should be a turning, stop.
Fane's hiss brought the group to a halt, the man beckoning Frithha closer.
Here, mage, bring that light, I just stepped on something. Another book,
murmured Param.
Nah, Callum, something soft, oh.
He had knelt as Frithha had, her light falling on a severed hand torn away from some absent arm just below the wrist, the fingers curled and set with rigor. It could have been the unfortunate carnage from a battle save one minor detail, the fingernails were missing, each torn from their bloody beds.
tortured,
concluded Warwick grimly.
We need to press on.
Fane nodded, straightening with Fritha to round the break in the wall of bookcases to their left.
Through here, the map said. Fuck.
Even with the curse, his cry came choked, a no-man calling for Helm's mercy, while Param gasped a similar oath in his own tongue. All Fritha could do was stare, the sight before her too horrific to turn from. There was an open area before them, a space where once had been placed desks for study and scribing. The tables there still remained, but smashed and overturned, melded together by some unseen force to make a large lopsided cross, and upon it, staked out and sagging like an Marpnoth scarecrow, hung the body of a man. He was pinned there by his skin, the flesh stretched from the muscle beneath in taut sheets, everything that could physically be removed from a body taken out and used to decorate his corpse. Fritha lowered her gaze from the empty eye sockets, her stomach churning, as she dropped to a crouch in her fear she might be sick, only to catch on some movement behind the jumbled mound of desks.
Over there!
The shadow darted right at her shout, squatting at the edge of a bookcase. Warwick's low growl issued the ultimatum.
You there, come out or we shoot. Don't,
a man's voice quavered.
I'm not one of them. Is it a priest?
Muttered Rook to his friend. Fane shrugged.
Or one of the other mercs they sent in.
The man was creeping forward warily, the light, at last, falling across his form, and a no-man gave voice to her shock.
Jar. Or Worth.
The merc captain gasped, no sign of the once commanding countenance in that beleaguered face.
And Malal? What are you? You know him?
Questioned Rook. Fritha shrugged, her words sounding as though another was speaking as she replied.
We made the journey up here with his band, our company parted ways a day ago.
Jar was still talking, wide bloodshot eyes darting back and forth.
New mercs, then, they just opened the wards, fuck. I missed them. We've got to get to the door.
He snapped, making to grab Fritha's arm.
We've got to get out of here.
Fritha danced back, a no-man pressing.
Jar, where are the rest of your company? Isan and Harold. The rest.
He snarled.
Fuck. Where do you think? They're dead. This place, they told us there were creatures, but we never thought, the lower levels are crawling with them, and that demon they've trapped controls them all, talks to them, gives them orders. We have to get out of here.
Fritha slowly shook her head.
They won't open the wards, Jar. Audran made that very clear.
He whirled to her, arms flung wide in his desperation.
Fuck. And what would you know? You're just some cleric's serving whore. Pretending to be a good girl and stringing me along when all the while you were spreading your legs for this hellmite?
Jar was really shouting now, the anger at days lived in terror taking over as he raged to any who would listen.
You women, you're all whores. You smile and tease, and when a bloke demands his due.
A hand shot from the darkness, a cascade of books falling about them as a no-man slammed him bodily against the bookcase behind.
I would stop there, were I you, lest you get your due. We need to calm down and stick together,
growled Warwick.
The wards will rise once we perform the ritual. I ain't going down there,
croaked Jar, struggling to pick himself up from the book-scattered tiles.
Then stay here,
snorted Fane.
We'll be sure to send a few demons your way. You mongrel whoreson.
Fritha sighed.
You really aren't helping yourself, Jar. Come, you still have a weapon? Then put it to some use.
Jar was shaking his head, his dark eyes raking across her face as though he could find the truth he sought within.
Who are you?
She smiled weakly.
I am whoever the situation demands at the time. Now, come on.
Past the tortured man they moved, Fane leading them through a break in the bookcases opposite and down another narrow aisle, the 2 rows of shelves ending in the stairs they sought. A flight of 7 or so stone steps was cut into the floor, the hinges and handle of an iron-bound door at the foot just glimmering on the edge of her wear light. The young rook pushed forward.
Here, I'll unlock they.
His scream echoed about them, the flash of metal falling across his body the instant it touched the topmost step, and suddenly the lad was on his back, blood spraying from his thigh while the rest of his leg was tumbling down the steps, the halberd that had hewn it clean through now laying across their path. Shrill laughter rang across the low ceiling.
Rook!
A no-man struggled to push past the wall of bodies.
Here, let me in, I can help. Malal.
But Fritha was already at the priest's arm, throwing her light upon the butchery, the place where his leg had once been now a gory stump, the limb cleaved away just below the knee. Blood was everywhere, a no-man fighting to stem the flow as his friends pressed in about them, the young lad whimpering like a child as his consciousness faded.
My leg, oh, Ilmater's mercy! Rook, stay with us, Rook!
Warwick's bark seemed to rouse him, the lad jerking upright bloody hands raised from his leg with dreamlike wonder, and Fritha saw the unnatural smile twist his mouth before they snatched about her neck.
Fritha!
Fritha could not even choke a reply, hands with a strength greater than any man should possess crushing her throat, her clawing fingers ignored.
Rook! Get him off her!
About her, men wrestled in vain. The world was going black, bright points of light fizzing behind her eyes in angry stars.
Fritha!
A sickening crunch and suddenly she was released, Fritha collapsing in the pooling blood next to the lad's body, and she opened her eyes to find a no-man hastily wiping the fragments of skull and hair from the head of his mace.
Fritha, are you all right?
Fritha just nodded, still gulping at the air. The men about her were panting as though they had all sprinted a league, and a tense silence held the group, each waiting for some aftermath.
What that?
Gasped Param.
I told you,
cried Jar, frantic once more.
I said, we have to go back. Then fuck off back alone.
Snapped Fane. A no-man moved to gently heave her up as Warwick turned to the stairs, the man kicking the fallen halberd from his path.
Come on, we need to keep moving. Fane, take the lead, and check for traps.
A floor below and Fritha had to wonder why her breath was not misting in the air, the cold stinging the back of her bruised throat. They were crowded in a darkened entrance hall, just a small half-circle of a room before the 2 ornately carved doors before them, the scenes of worship and prayers defaced by the gouge of heavy claws. The doors had been left ajar, a slice of bright yellow light cutting through the gloom, and Fritha felt her skin crawl as another burst of shrill laughter echoed from the room beyond. They were not alone. A grim look traveled the group, Warwick the first to break their silence in an urgent hiss.
Where are the steps?
Fane nodded to the doors.
On the other side of the room.
Fritha crept forward, Fane at her back, and all but Jar crowding about them, the merc captain throwing longing glances to the door they had just all piled through. She reached the doors, that pane of light falling across her face as she finally took in the large circular chamber but a door's breadth away. It was the sacristy, where once the holy relics of their faith had been kept for the few pilgrims who had the journey up there. No longer were they held in such reverence though. The chests of vestments and scrolls had been upturned, their contents rent, while the vials of precious oils had been smashed, the holy debris scattered across the floor and across them stumbled and stalked inhuman collections of limbs and torsos, torn corpses now jumbled together to make monsters more horrified for their scant familiarity. Along either side, 2 long jewed screens ran the length of the room, the carved wood wrought with scenes in gold and mother of pearl now smashed and gouged as the doors had been, while in the room's center was a large marble sarcophagus where slept Saint Malin's bones. The golden cage about it was smeared with blood and gore, a group of 4 large imps jostling for room as they worked upon their latest monster upon the table-like surface, the creatures laughing wildly as they sliced and bound four mismatched legs to gaping, eyeless head. Frithha drew back from the doors, turning to meet with faces just as paled as her own.
"How in the hells are we to get over there?"
hissed Param, his dark eyes so wide, she could make out the white around each iris. Jer was already shaking his head wildly.
I'm not going in there." "Then stay here,"
snapped Fane.
"What about those screens either side? The right one looked mostly intact, could we sneak behind them?" "It's our best chance,"
concluded Anomen.
"The only other way would be for someone to provide a distraction and that."
In his silence, the agreement was made. Frithha squared her shoulders to the doors. Fane was likely more stealthy, but if something went wrong no one could run like she could.
"I'll go first."
The slightest pressure from her hand and the door swung forward without a sound. She edged through the gap, keeping to the wall, Fane only a pace behind her as the others made to follow. Frithha had reached the first of the screens now, picking her way through the chaos of smashed wood and overturned chests, her heart thudding along with each tentative step. Just 4 more screens, just 3, just. A screech from the tomb, the imps all turned as one and shrieking in their own tongue. She did not know what had alerted them and she did not pause to find out.
"Run!"
Frithha sprang into a dead sprint. Spells were exploding overhead, jars, books and knives suddenly pelting towards them. Frithha ducked a hail of ceramics to kick aside the tangled mess of arms that had just lumbered into her path, the girl rounding the last screen to fly into the door. A sickening pause to wrench it back and she was through, Fane almost knocking her down the stairs as he barreled into the narrow stone corridor behind her. Warwick and Anomen were but a pace behind him, Param a good few paces behind them, while Jar.
"Come on!"
she screamed, the man drunk on his own fear as he stumbled through the flying debris. Warwick and Anomen pounded through the doors, Param quickening his pace as one of the imps broke away to flap after him, the others swooping in to surround Jar.
"Quickly, shut the doors!" "Wait, Jar's not, Jarrhe, run!" "Shut them now!"
The plangent slam and the last thing Frithha saw before the darkness claimed them was Jar, that man who had fed her wine and cake for a 10-day, flailing wildly as he slowly fell under a chaos of tearing claws. The screams faded to leave only the sound of the group's breathing, their broken gasps filling the darkness of that corridor. Frithha could not say later how long they stood there, but it was long enough for the cut on her forehead to clot and dry, before one by one they each turned and continued down into the darkness. The 3rd floor, according to Audran, housed the archives, and the walls of bookcases they finally stepped out into were similar to the library above them, though the cases were set closer together. The narrow avenue they found themselves within stretched off into in either direction, the blackness lifted here and there by the faint glow of the runes that dried the air and warded against molds, just like in Candlekeep.
"Which way?"
growled Warwick, glancing back and forth along the aisle. For the first time, Fane seemed at a loss.
"I don't know, the map, the bookcases used to be set in rows and the room was pretty much open, but now someone has made a maze,"
concluded Anomen. Param adjusted the grip on his scimitar.
Or a trap. I do not like this. Where are the stairs?
Pressed Warwick. Fane's memory did not fail him there.
In the northwest corner.
Warwick turned west.
Come on then. Wait.
Snapped Fritha, her eyes noting the rune that glimmered against the stone flags too late as the man took a step from them and vanished.
Warwick. He just disappeared,
cried Param. Fritha swallowed, leaning forward to examine the faintly glowing symbol where his foot had last fallen.
More traps, the room has been mazed. And what does that mean?
Cried Param.
These symbols, they will teleport anything that touches them. Well, then where is Warwick?
Demanded Fane.
Another level? Somewhere else in the room? I don't know.
Param was shaking, anger and fear fighting for control.
And what are we to do now?
Fane had his answer.
Head to the door. If Warwick's still here, he'll do the same. No, we should remain here, he may return. This is no time to argue, Callum. Fritha, Malal, whoever the hells you are, you're in front, I need your eyes.
They led the way, side by side, Fritha raking over every rune her eyes caught, bringing them to a halt at times when some unfamiliar symbol gave her pause. The faint chittering was back to the air, her heart jumping at every sound as in the distance, crashes and shrill screams of laughter sometimes split the silence.
It should not be far now,
hissed Fane.
I think I see a break-up. Ah!
His muffled cry came at the instant her foot found it too, the marshy squelch of soft tissue making her stomach heave. Behind them, Param's panicked whispering.
What is it?
Fane hesitated, but it was too late, Fritha's wearlight falling on the body at their feet. Warwick had been spared the indignity of most murdered down there, only his intestines removed, the slimy ropes strew about him like carnival streamers. Param was making a choking noise, his sword raised as he backed away from the sight.
No, we are going to die down here. These creatures will slaughter us to the last. Calm yourself,
a Nomen rumbled steadily,
we have made it this far. No, do not touch me, priest, it was your ilk who sent us here to die. I will go back, they will lift the wards for me. They won't, Callum, and you know it. Get a grip on yourself. Please, Param,
pressed Fritha over Fane's impatience,
we can get through this, we're so close now. No. I will not die down here. You will not stop me. I will see you dead first.
He raised his blade, a Nomen making to grab his wrist and wrestle him back when the man suddenly stopped, the sword clattering limply from his hand as blood gurgled from the arrow in his neck and he collapsed before a Nomen could even catch him. The pair turning as one to find Fane shouldering his bow once more with a grim regret.
He was beyond reason, we don't have time for this.
Laughter cut him off, all whipping back to find that shape behind them, Param staggering slowly to his feet with jerking limbs, his smile a leering slash of white in the darkness.
Fools! I will eat your souls!
And with a lunge he was gone, shambling wilding off the way they had come. Fane muttered an oath and turned back to their path.
Here, it can't be far now.
Through a break in the bookcases to their left and they at last left the winding alleys of shelves, an open space left in the northwest corner of the room and on the wall opposite was the great stone door they sought. Beyond that the demon was held behind the adding seals, just a few more yards and that nightmare would be over. At first she thought it mere decoration, but as they crossed the book-littered space, Frithha could see a seal of 7 concentric rings set into the door, each with a myriad of symbols carved upon its curve.
It's a combination lock, she provided unnecessarily. There is something in the notes Audran sent with us, we need to align, ah.
Her scream was not the only one to ring out, but all were lost to the inhuman roar that shook the chamber, a black shape, all limbs and thrashing tail leaping from the shadows above the bookcases behind them. A Nomen was already back and making to circle the snapping jaws, Fane readying an arrow.
Frithha, get that door open. We'll hold this.
Frithha whipped back to the stone rings before her, the paper trembling in her hand as she matched the code. Behind, the creature was circling the 2 warriors, its long claws rasping against the stone tiles. The rings were heavy, both her hands needed on the iron handles to drag the symbols into alignment. In the corner of her eye, a Nomen was behind his shield, catching every blow while Fane was dancing in to worry the creature's flanks. Bow swapped for blade after arrows were proved useless against the beast's armored hide. A last glance at the parchment, and Frithha heaved the final ring into place, the sound of something within dropping through the gap she had made behind to roll off into the mechanism, locks grinding open with a rumble of stone.
It's done, it's...
Her voice was lost to a shriek, the girl whipping back to meet the creature that was suddenly lunging towards her.
Frithha!
The men dived into its path, a Nomen swept aside with a sweep of black talons as Fane rolled under the blow, the half-elf on his feet again in one smooth movement to find himself a foot from that snarling mouth. He raised his blade with a roar that matched the creature's, a last defiant scream at death, and its jaws closed about his body even as the man drove his sword up through the roof of its mouth. Together, they fell dead.
A Nomen,
Frithha gasped, no time to reflect on Fane's sacrifice in the press of their task and hurrying to the man's side as he staggered upright.
Are you? I'm fine,
he panted, his right thigh guard clattering to the floor and hands clamped about the wound beneath.
We need to get inside before anything else arrives.
Through the yawing doorway, and Frithha held his arm as a Nomen limped down the 4 stone steps behind her. The room they descended into black as pitch and large enough that her wear-light could not touch the walls. Below them, the entire floor was a massive circular keystone, ornately carved with runes and prayers, the all-seeing eye of Helm gazing out from the center. She left a Nomen at the bottommost step, the girl darting back up to haul the door shut behind them, stone slamming upon stone with an ominous boom, and she could not help but pause, frightened it would be followed by the clatter of locks, though none came.
A Nomen,
she whined, high-pitched and panicky as she turned to notice the fine sheen of sweat glistening upon his face.
Just perform the ritual,
he gasped, leaning back against the wall behind.
The priests will sense it, they will come, it will be all right.
The ritual was simplicity itself, but for all that Frithha found it hard to focus, a certain weight to the air pulling at her thoughts, and it was harder than she could have ever believed to append that mixture of demon blood and holy water onto the elaborate stone seal while intoning the prayer to Helm. The faintest tingle across her skin and it was done, the wool about her mind suddenly gone, and the stone bottle hit the flags with a chime, Frithha already back at the steps and tripping up to grab the inch-thick iron door handle. It refused to budge.
Frithha!
Came a Nomen behind her. She could not answer in her dawning horror. A wild moment to rake over the door, searching for some missed bolt or alcove for the ward stone she held, only to give up. The door handle rattled uselessly again in her mounting desperation.
Frithha,
a Nomen gasped, pushing himself upright to hobble closer.
It is too heavy for you.
She turned slowly back to the room, their faces level as he reached the foot of the steps.
It's sealed. They said the ward stone would open it. Once we performed the ritual, the stone would push back the seals and we could leave.
Anomen drew the conclusion she was afraid of.
They betrayed us. We don't know that,
she cried.
There must be something around here, something we haven't done.
Her magic did nothing. The handle would not be turned or pulled or pried or forced. She searched every inch of the door, the frame, those steps, and that room, the bones of the last few poor victims who had found themselves down there, a discovery she kept to herself. The girl, hardly able to form the words past the growing lump in her throat as frustration gave way to exhausted tears.
No. No, not after all this.
All at once the fight left her and she ended her search where she had first began it, sinking down next to Anomen where he was collapsed against the wall of the steps, his eyes closed as he gripped his bloody thigh.
How is your leg? Do not fret. I will die of thirst with you.
He tried a weak laugh, the sound soon lost to a groan. Fritha on her knees and bent over him in an instant.
Let me see.
She pushed his feeble protestations aside, the torn linen trousers sticking to the torn scarlet flesh, the wound itself hard to make out in pooling black blood. Fritha held incarnadine hands up to the light.
Anomen.
She staggered to her feet, horror leaving her clumsy as she shrugged her chain shirt to a shining pool at her feet, her tunic hauled off in the same movement. A mere nick with her knife and the sleeve was torn away for bandages, the fine white kertie she wore underneath smeared with blood as she fought to staunch the wound.
Here, Anomen, lie down, rest your foot on the last step, you need to keep it elevated.
A panicked few moments spent applying all the pressure her aching arms could manage, the wetness seeping through her bald fingers.
Anomen,
she begged, back at his head and shaking him for some response.
Anomen, I can't get it to stop. Anomen.
His head lolled to the side, lips parting to groan her name.
Fritha. Fuck, where is it?
She was back at her bag, digging through to contents to find her old wooden stylus. Her tunic lost its other sleeve, the heavy linen doubled over twice and bound tightly above the wound as she had seen Jahara do once before, her stylus tied above the first knot and under the second. Slowly, she twisted the wooden shaft, the makeshift bandage growing tighter with each turn to a pressure that would have been painful should Anomen have been conscious to feel it. The bleeding ebbed and finally stopped.
Anomen.
He murmured something too quiet for her to catch and fell silent once more. Fritha secured the stylus and moved her hands up to his neck, the pulse she found, fast and weak. His face looked drained in her wear, light, pale, and cool to the touch. There was nothing more she could do. Her feet felt unsteady under her as she stalked about that room, hunting every corner for some lever or lock she could have missed, the girl whirling at each noise left in her wake in the vain hope there was another down there. And when there was nothing else to do, she had stood at the door and screamed until her voice had filled the chamber, echoing back and forth against merciless stone in 1,000 shrieking voices, until she truly had descended into hell. And as that last voice had died, she had moved back to Anomen and sat in silence next to him, massaging his cold hands and holding his wrist to her face to feel the pulse within, light and much quicker than the dull heavy thud of own heart, her tears running freely down his arm.
Please.
It was not a sound at first, no more than a tickle in ear, and, for an instant, she felt she had imagined it in her desperation.
Hello. Godchild. Who is there?
She felt a laugh.
The only other creature sealed down here.
The dread left her throat in wavering croak.
What do you want? You may not know of me, godling, but I know of you. That mage spoke of you when she came to deal with me, Fritha, last of the Ballspawn, the one they chose so long ago. Melisande was here. Indeed, it was to parley with me that she first visited this keep. She wanted knowledge of the abyss where once I held great sway, knowledge of the throne that stands in Baal's old domain. What did you tell her?
She could hear its smile.
A little truth, many lies. I was supposed to give her the knowledge in exchange for my freedom, but she betrayed me, as I betrayed her. Her magic merely weakened my cage. After all, why release a demon who once rivaled her god in power? She left here thinking herself the victor, but she was wrong. The knowledge I gave her was all but useless, and her spell enabled me to breach the seals and bring chaos and death to my captors.
It laughed again, booming and contented.
Even with the seals renewed, I am stronger than those pathetic Helmites realize. Strong enough at least to lift the wards upon that door.
It let the weight of its insinuation sink in a moment before it came to its price.
But I will have a boon for my trouble.
Fritha almost held her breath.
And what would you want? There is greatness in your future, godling. One day you will have power enough to free me, and when that day comes, you must swear you will do so. You can't know that, the future is not set. No.
The voice conceded.
But it is worth the chance and I am nothing if not patient. Helm put you here,
she faltered, wondering why she was even bothering to reason when she knew she had no other choice.
He won't just allow me to release you. Yes,
it sneered,
because he has shown such concern for what has occurred here so far, his all-seeing eye merely watching his followers sacrifice you in the place of their sworn duty. You have my offer, godling, either accept it or not, and do not think to lie.
It added quickly,
the words you speak here will be binding.
Fritha swallowed, letting the sight of the body next to her to gird her heart.
I swear it.
A ripple of satisfaction, and perhaps it was imagined, but Fritha felt suddenly colder.
Good. Until we meet again, godchild.
The door above her rattled once and then fell silent, the presence about her fading, and Fritha was already up and struggling to get her hands under a gnome's dead weight. The door burst open, every priest whipping to the sound and frozen in their task, clearing the bodies and debris from the upper chamber. An instant to register what they were seeing, Fritha slowly backing through to drag that unconscious body after her, and they were suddenly upon them, a gnome pulled from her grasp, laid out and hidden behind a wall of bodies as someone screamed for a stretcher. Fritha sank back against doorjamb and let her knees buckle under her, her own weight dragging her to the floor. Audran remained back from the throng, watching his fellows clamor over the two people he never believed he would have to see again. Fritha caught his eye, still enough energy in her left to spit her hatred on the ground between them and Audran, his body sagging under an unseen weight, turned away. Bodies moved around her. They hurried back and forth in the distance, speaking in whispers. Some were closer, fetching, fussing. Someone was dabbing the cut on her forehead, the astringent scent of the alcohol somehow registering more than its sting. There, came a voice, softly feminine, and the face of a young acolyte dipped into view, her dark features framed by a crisp, white wimple.
The wound has been cleaned and dressed. I will let it heal on its own, I wouldn't want to leave a scar. And don't forget to finish that.
Fritha dropped her attention to the cup she held, the bobbing brandy clinquant in the lamplight.
Sister.
The woman drew away from her at the address. Fritha did not note where she went, she did not care, and it was taking all her effort not to recline on the bed she was sat upon, go to sleep and never wake up. The infirmary was a long, narrow room, a row of beds lined against one wall, a table between each that held some lamp or jug or book of prayer. On the wall opposite, cabinets of glass jars glistened in the lamplight, while high above, mullioned windows looked straight out upon a pitch-black sky. At the other end of the room, brothers and sisters fussed over the fireplace, flitting in and out with more towels, bandages and steaming bowls of hot water, their murmured worries echoing back to her in that muted world. He's lost so much blood. The tourniquet has been on too long. Sister Rahila is fighting to save the limb, but... Before her, another presence had arrived. That familiar voice, hoarse in regret, was enough to make her raise her eyes. Audran was there, his close-set eyes trained upon some point just above her head.
Malal, Sister Benita has allowed me a few moments, though I do not know what good can come of them. I owe you more apologies than can ever be uttered in the years I have left on this earth.
Fritha drew a sip of brandy.
Ask Helm to forgive you. I cannot.
Audran dipped his face in grave acceptance of her disgust.
I understand. I cannot excuse my actions, only explain them. When Saint Malin first sacrificed her life to defeat the demon here and Helm bound the creature, posthumously she became the first leader of our order, the Knights of the Vigil. In those days the fortress here was little more than that, just a military outpost where the knights pit their skills against the mountains, ever watchful. And when the time came, one was sent down to renew the seal and sacrifice their life for the good of all. But over the years, our fame grew and people both within our church and without began to bring things to us, books and items of power too dangerous to be left in the world. An order of knights gradually became an order of curators, our true purpose forgotten by all but the highest in our ranks. The ritual you performed today could have been worked 30 years ago, 20, 10, until the very day the seals broke. Such careless waste of life for a threat seemed never to materialize.
Fritha bristled at this repentant cowardice.
And was my life not worth saving? Have you not lived long enough, Helmite, that a score of men half your age had to take your place? You misunderstand, he sighed, a certain bitterness creeping in, it was never my place to go. As High Father I had merely the honor of choosing who of my brethren was to be sacrificed. It seemed so unfair, for me to make another die for nothing. And when it was too late and the seals were breached, I did not trust we had the strength to fight back and right our failure. So I sought others to take our place. Why should one of the faithful be forced to perish alone in the darkness, when there were others more worthy of such an end? Mercenaries who often weighed their lives against mere coin seemed a fitting sacrifice. And did you tell them they would never escape that prison to collect it?
Again the dark eyes darted away from her face, the man pocketing his hands into his wide sleeves.
I was growing desperate. When you arrived, it seemed that Helm himself understood our plight. This way we could reseal the wards and trap a potentially dangerous ballspawn as well. Oh, well, that's all right then. I mean, any ballspawn would deserve to be left in the darkness to rot. And or Worth, did he deserve it too? If you recall, I tried to keep him here in safety. I did not wish to see any innocents harmed. He is of the faithful, I believe he would have understood our decision, in time.
Fritha snorted coldly, how little he knew.
Believe me when I say you would not be talking to him now so peaceably as you are me.
A pause, the man looking up at the inky windows.
No. I am sorry. I did not think I would ever have to face those I had betrayed.
He glanced back to her with a faint, depreciating smile.
I suppose you were the savior for whom we had all prayed, who else but a godchild would have the strength to bend the wards and free herself?
Fritha said nothing, the choking weight of her vow like a hand about her throat.
So your demon is sealed, she continued bluntly. What now? You just spend your days pottering about this library feeling guilty.
Audryn squared his shoulders to her anger.
No, I am going on pilgrimage to Mazdaca. I will spread the light of Helm to the new world.
And likely die of some exotic disease before the year's end. Frithla fought down the righteous good. And steeled herself.
Not so fast. We will need healers in the days to come. There is a war on the horizon. You will spare people. You will come with us. After this is over, your penance can be your own.
Audryn stared at her, eyes holding a flicker of surprise, though she could not discern any more of how he felt by this show of trust. He nodded once.
As you wish. As for why you first journeyed here, Melisande. I know,
sighed Frithla.
She was here for the demon.
Indeed, but I feel that was only because we would not allow her what she first sought. We hold knowledge here, of the time of troubles and the prophecies of Baal's rebirth.
They were given to us in sacred trust. They would never be shown to anyone, lest the power they speak of bring destruction and ruin to Faerun.
For the first time, Audryn seemed able to hold her gaze.
I will extend that trust to you, godchild.
A polite cough behind him. Sister Benita was drawing a close to their meeting. Audryn stepped back to dip his head in a brief bow.
You should rest now. Sister.
Frithla let the address drift over her with the howling air, her body curled upon the cold tiles and arms held up across her face to block out the light and wind both, making her a small, dark cave of warmth in that storm-battered plain.
Sister.
Frithla burrowed further into her arms.
Just leave me.
A sigh above her, impatient and sneering.
You are at the keep. Yes. Allow me to guess, then. Melisande never set a foot in the place. No, she was there. Then you found something,
Saravik intoned dully,
something in the prophecy that is not to your liking and... A demon had been loosed from beneath the library. We battled it and my friend was injured. He may die. Even if he lives, he will not be the same man. This!
cried that voice above her, booming his incredulity to a boiling sky.
This is what has you in here hiding like a sullen child? He knew the risks when he followed you. What is one casualty against the thousands you seek to save?
Frithla said nothing. What could she say? When you looked at just the numbers it was as Saravik said, but then she did not know the people she worked to save, she had not fought with them or laughed with them, or sat in their gardens and told them they would try to love them, and at that moment the trade did not seem so fair. Saravik took her silence for sulking, his tone making no attempt to hide his derision.
In war, your only concern can be your goal. No sacrifice can be too great. If this friend dies, then so be it. If he lives to be a burden, cut him loose and forge on without him, the throne will demand no less.
Frithla did not recall standing, but she was up now, a finger flung at the man who had hastily danced to his feet as well.
Damn your bastard throne! I have lost more than you could ever understand already to this war. Pathetic,
Saravik sneered, aloof to her anger.
I knew all that determination was merely bluster. You say you want to ascend and save Tethur, but as soon as the path becomes hard you are mewling like a child. I was a fool to put my faith in you.
Saravik made to turn away. Her hand dragged him back to her with force enough to see him staggering.
Do not you dare to lecture me. What of the friends who died for you? Who kicked and thrashed their last moments at the end of a rope? Do you regret nothing? You enslaved, you murdered, you planned to slaughter thousands for your goal. Pfah, and why should I care?
He snorted.
Everyone dies. But they didn't have to die then. They could have died tomorrow or the next day. They could have lived to see their children grow, or fall in love, or have one last drink with their friends. You made that decision for them. What gave you the right? I was stronger, that gave me the right. And was it worth it? The lives you destroyed, the friends you sacrificed, Tomoko, also you could rot in the abyss for your crimes. I was chosen.
He roared, wild and desperate like a cornered animal.
You are dead.
She bawled back, so furious she felt she could tear him apart with her bare hands.
And your friends are dead, and your love hates you, and your name is a curse to be spat. And for what? Power? Why? However powerful you are, there is always someone stronger. What more proof need you, the god you sought to replace, had he himself been killed? It was my right.
Saravik roared again, a mantra against burgeoning doubts.
I sought the power because it was mine to seek. And then what?
Frithha demanded.
You become a god and you can sit on a throne in the abyss and find yourself a whole load of new enemies to strive against? Why?
She leaned in, dropping both her voice and her gaze as the revelation hit her.
Because you were afraid.
The sheer violence of his reaction confirmed it.
I fear nothing. Admit it.
She snapped back.
You learned of the prophecy as a child in the temple, the rest of us forgot. How must it have sounded to you? Only one was to survive. Every day it gnawed at you. What if you weren't the one they had picked? No. Then the Harpers came with blood and fire, a first taste of the death you feared. In the house of Realtor you felt safer, but it was not enough to quell those fears, that there could only be one, that you were hunted. The more power you gained, the more you feared to lose it, feared becoming that boy again, wandering alone across the plains of Tethur, hungry and scared. To rise as Lord of Murder, it was the only way you could ever stop being afraid.
The man was shaking his head, defiant, but Frithha did not care. She took a step back, a hand raised to pronounce her sentence.
Saravik Anchef, you are a coward and a dog, and no one to be judging me. Return to the abyss, you are banished.
That a man who had commanded armies and murdered at whim could pale so quickly.
No, sister,
he choked, voice coming hoarse in the sudden emotion.
I still have knowledge, I can help. I need not the help of a coward. If you regret nothing, then accept the fate you earned.
He grabbed the hand meant to dismiss him, that great man falling to his knees before her.
No, sister, I cannot, you cannot know, do not send me back there.
She snatched her hand away, turning to stalk off, his murmur almost lost to the howling winds.
I wish I had never learned of that damned prophecy.
Frithha glanced back. Saravik was sat on his haunches, his haggard face turned away from her and gazing out across the checkered plain while the wind whipped his hoary hair into a fine white halo. A brother and sister with 40 years between them. Something in her shoulders sagged, and the pity she seemed to carry for all her fellow children ached through her heart.
Well, I suppose that is a start.
Frithha awoke stiff and cold. Someone had placed a blanket over her as she had slept, but it had done nothing against the tight chill that coiled in every limb. The long stone room was held in breathless, blue-hued silence, something dreamlike about the way the shadows shimmered in what little light poured through the high, mullioned windows, the sky beyond a velvety midnight blue. There was still no sign of a gnomon, the row of beds that stretched away from her empty barring the very last. Sister Benita was asleep on the bed nearest the door, and she did not stir as Frithha's bare feet dropped to icy stone tiles and padded silently past her to reach for the plain iron doorknob. Frithha did not recall how she reached that place, perhaps she was still dreaming, only that the next time she was truly aware of her surroundings she was standing at the mouth of the chapel. Not a candle flickered there now, the once golden alcoves barren, and the pews sliced black shadows across her path as she made her way up the carpeted aisle. The altar was raised upon a dais, a single step to elevate that great stone table, the marble swathed in rich tapestries worked in gold and pearls. The large window behind offered no light and the saint upon it looked just as it was, a simple painting upon glass, all its former glory stolen from elsewhere. Frithha sank to the step and pulled her cold feet up under her. She could not pray, there seemed no point. If ever devotion to these uncaring gods had been proved pointless, it was then, when a righteous defender of the faith lay crippled by the lies of his brothers and in the house of his Lord, no less. But perhaps her blame was unwarranted, and what she mistook for disregard was, in fact, incapability. Perhaps the divine power to shape worlds could not deal in the chaotic minutiae of those billions of competing lives that existed down there. Perhaps she would be the same one day, looking down upon those who begged prostrate before her altar for some miracle, when all the power she had over such infinitesimal lives was to hope they could learn to carry their burdens and not poison those about them as they did so. Frithha hunched over to rest her head on her folded arm. She should return to the infirmary.
Malal.
Frithha blinked in the faint light, her eyes hot and sandy. The stone step of the dais had made for a poor bed, her body aching as she uncurled to find the young acolyte who had tended her earlier standing above.
Sister Benita. Is it? Brother Iorwerth is awake.
Frithha swallowed past the sudden sick terror that gripped her.
His leg.
The woman smiled and her young face seemed to light from within.
He is as whole as when he came here.
She inclined her head to the altar before them.
Helm heard your prayers.
At the window above, a milky dawn was just creeping past St. Malin's toes, falling in shafts across the altar, and the once sumptuous altar cloth looked frayed and gaudy in the frail light. Frithha turned away and stiffly made to rise, the tears of her relief already beginning to well.
Take me to him.
End of chapter.